Li Auto just built its own 5 nanometers chip, something not even BMW or Mercedes has done. Here's the thing that stopped me cold this week. Li Auto, a car company, just mass-produced its own 5-nanometer AI chip. They're calling it the Mach M100, and it delivers 2,560 TOPS of compute power. That number matters because it's roughly double the previous generation, and it debuts inside the upcoming L9 Livis, their flagship 6-seat SUV. Now, I want to be clear about what self-developed means here. This isn't Li Auto tweaking someone else's reference design. According to what CEO Li Xiang announced, this is a full-stack in-house effort, their own architecture, their own software stack, built so they're no longer dependent on third-party silicon suppliers. I think the closest Western parallel is what Tesla did with its full self-driving chip back in 2019, and even then, a lot of people in the industry dismissed it as a PR stunt. They were wrong about Tesla. The question is whether Li Auto is in the same position now, or whether this is a much harder road than they're letting on. Let me put the chip situation in context, because I think most Western viewers underestimate how strategically important this is. Right now, most Chinese automakers, and most Western ones too, are buying their AI compute from NVIDIA. The orange chip, the Thor chip, that's fine until it isn't. Export controls, supply chain shocks, geopolitical friction, these are real risks, and Chinese automakers have been burned before. So when Li Auto says they're going full in-house on silicon, they're not just chasing a spec sheet. They're buying themselves insurance. I'd argue this is actually more strategically rational for a Chinese brand than it would be for, say, Volkswagen, because the supply risk is genuinely asymmetric. Now, I'll admit I was skeptical when Li Auto first hinted at this path about a year ago. I thought they'd end up licensing someone else's IP and calling it self-developed. That appears to have been wrong, though I'll reserve final judgment until independent engineers get a look at the actual architecture. What I can say is that 2,560 TOPS is a serious number. For reference, NVIDIA's Orin tops out around 254 TOPS per chip. Even accounting for how these numbers get counted differently, that gap is real. Li Auto is also claiming the L9 Livis chassis is benchmarked against Ferrari's suspension tuning philosophy, which is either genuinely impressive or the boldest marketing line I've heard this year. Possibly both. Here's where it gets complicated, and I think this is the part most coverage is glossing over. Li Auto stock has been cut nearly in half from its all-time high. The company is still posting losses. And yet, Morgan Stanley just issued an overweight rating, essentially a buy call, with the L9 Livis launch as the central thesis. Their argument, which I find both compelling and slightly uncomfortable, is that zero expectations are actually the best setup for a recovery. When nobody believes in you, any positive surprise moves the needle hard. I think that's true as a market mechanic. But it also means the L9 Livis isn't just a car launch. It's a referendum on whether Li Auto can reposition itself from a premium family SUV brand into something closer to an AI and autonomous driving platform. That's a much bigger bet. The Mach M100 chip is the physical proof point for that narrative. If it performs in the real world the way the spec sheet suggests, Morgan Stanley's thesis gets a lot stronger. If it underdelivers, if the autonomous driving experience in the L9 Livis is only marginally better than what XPeng or Huawei's AITO is already doing, then this chip story starts to look like a distraction from the financial pressure. I genuinely don't know which way it goes. What I do know is that the timing is deliberate. Li Auto needs a win, and they've chosen to make this chip the centerpiece of it. So where do I land on this? I think the Mach M100 is a genuinely significant engineering achievement, and I don't say that lightly. Building a 5 nanometers chip at production scale is not something you fake. The fact that Li Auto has gotten this far is real. What I'm less certain about is whether compute power alone translates into a better autonomous driving experience for the person actually sitting in the car. We've seen this movie before, massive TOPS numbers on a spec sheet, and then the real-world lane change assist is still janky. The L9 Livis launch will be the actual test. If the full-stack integration, chip, software, sensors, chassis, comes together the way Li Auto is promising, then I think this becomes a landmark moment for Chinese new energy vehicles. Not just a car launch, but proof that a Chinese automaker can own its entire technology stack the way Apple owns its silicon pipeline. If it doesn't, The financial pressure on Li Auto gets a lot harder to absorb. My honest prediction, the hardware will impress. The software will need another 6 months. But that might be enough to stop the bleeding and buy Li Auto the time it needs. Drop your take in the comments, especially if you think I'm being too generous or not generous enough. And if you want to see a full deep dive the moment the L9 Livis hits the road, subscribe, because that video is already on my list. If you think Li Auto's chip move is the real deal or a massive overreach, tell me in the comments. And subscribe so you don't miss the full L9 Livis road test when it drops.